Behind prison walls, a different justice awaits the most horrific law offenders. Their punishment doesn't end with a life sentence. It just begins. Within the harsh confines, they face a new reality where their dark pasts haunt them, and the first 24 hours behind bars are often the most harrowing moments for their new life. What could go wrong for people who have little care for law? Today, let's reveal the tragic fate of the most horrific killers in prison.
It's hard to imagine what is going on in the minds of people who have little care for the lives of other humans. Well, who can know how it's better to treat a serial violator of law than his mate? In February 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer, the notorious and prolific hitman who had confessed to the heinous murders of 17 young men and boys, arrived at Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin, amidst a frenzy of media attention. The prison that would become his new home was abuzz with the news of his arrival, and officials took extraordinary measures to ensure his safety due to the gruesome nature of his crimes. Dahmer was placed in protective custody, isolating him from the general population to prevent potential harm from other inmates who might seek to exploit his notoriety. He was confined to a solitary cell, shackled whenever he left it to safeguard him from the wrath of his fellow prisoners. For the first year, Dahmer's life behind bars was one of unrelenting solitude and silence. He spent his days alone in his cell with minimal interaction with other prisoners, a stark reminder of the monstrous acts that had led him to this place. During this time, Dahmer kept to himself, immersing himself in books and writing letters, his behavior relatively calm and uneventful. However, as the months passed, Dahmer began to request more freedom of movement and interaction within the prison, seeking a taste of normalcy after a year of isolation. Prison officials granted Dahmer's request, transferring him to a unit designated for prisoners with emotional problems. This shift marked a significant change in Dahmer's prison life, allowing him to attend classes, share communal meals, and perform work duties alongside other inmates. While this increased freedom brought a semblance of normalcy, it also came with risks, as his notoriety and the nature of his crimes made him a target for those seeking to exploit his fame. Moreover, his dark sense of humor, which included macabre jokes and molding prison food to resemble severed limbs, disturbed many fellow inmates, setting the stage for future conflicts and tensions within the prison walls. As Dahmer tried to adapt to his new life, his disturbing behavior and dark humor soon led to deadly consequences. Amidst the darkness of his prison life, Dahmer began a Bible correspondence course and expressed a desire to be baptized. In the spring of 1994, Roy Ratcliffe, a Church of Christ minister, visited Dahmer and agreed to help him with his conversion. On a fateful day in May 1994, Dahmer was baptized in a whirlpool bath at the prison, sparking questions about his sincerity. Despite his newfound faith, Dahmer's interactions with other inmates remained tense. In July 1994, during a chapel service, another inmate attempted to slash Dahmer's throat with a homemade weapon. The blade broke, leaving Dahmer with only a scratch. He was temporarily placed in isolation, but insisted on returning to the general population, claiming the attack was a one-time thing. Dahmer's willingness to remain among the general population puzzled many, with some believing he had a death wish. On the morning of November 28, 1994, Dahmer was assigned to cleaning duty in the prison's gym bathrooms, along with Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver. The three were left unsupervised for 20 minutes, and when guards returned, they found Dahmer and Anderson brutally beaten. Dahmer was pronounced dead an hour later, and Anderson succumbed to his injuries soon after. Scarver later revealed that he despised Dahmer and questioned whether prison personnel had intentionally left them alone. Some believed Dahmer's death behind bars was inevitable, with his attorney Gerald Boyle suggesting that Dahmer deliberately sought out death while in prison, unable to take his own life, but expecting someone to do it for him. If this is the case, it goes without saying that he got what he wanted in the end.
El Chapo, the notorious El Chapo's arrival at ADX Florence in 2019 marked the beginning of a harrowing new chapter in his life. On that fateful day, the infamous drug lord was transported under heavy guard to the Supermax prison, notorious for its impenetrable security and brutal living conditions. Upon arrival, El Chapo was immediately subjected to the dehumanizing intake process, a tedious and invasive procedure designed to strip away any remnants of his former life. Guards conducted a thorough strip search, inspecting every inch of his body for contraband, a humiliating process that was just the beginning of the relentless scrutiny he would face at ADX Florence. Next, he was issued his prison uniform, a stark contrast to the luxurious attire he once wore. The uniform symbolized his new identity as just another inmate in the Alcatraz of the Rockies, his home to one of the most notorious and bloodthirsty narco-criminals of all. With his personal belongings confiscated and his freedom stripped away, El Chapo was escorted to his cell, a solid 7 by 12-foot concrete box that was a far cry from the high-class surroundings he was accustomed to. The bed, desk, and chair were all made of concrete and bolted to the floor, ensuring they could not be moved or used as weapons. The cell also included a toilet and a shower area, but the water was time-controlled to prevent flooding the cell. The design of the cell featured a solid outer door and an interior jail door, and a tiny window measuring 42 inches tall and 4 inches wide offered no view of the surrounding Rocky Mountains, leaving the former drug lord completely isolated. The soundproof walls ensured that he could not communicate with other inmates, further intensifying his sense of isolation. El Chapo's initial reaction to the facility was one of shock and disbelief. The extreme isolation and harsh conditions were a stark contrast to the life of power and luxury he once knew. A murderer and a folk hero to the Mexican government. Every aspect of his life was controlled by the guards, from the timing of his meals to the hours of light in his cell. The electricity was controlled by the guards, and lights were turned off at a specific time, plunging him into darkness and reinforcing the sense of powerlessness. For 23 hours a day, El Chapo would be confined to this cell, with only an hour for recreation. Even then, he would be taken to a concrete pit that resembled an empty swimming pool, surrounded by high walls and offering no view of the outside world. Under the watchful eyes of 3 guards, he could walk 10 steps in a straight line, or 31 steps in a circle. This limited movement was designed to maintain the physical health of inmates at ADX Florence, while ensuring they remained disoriented and isolated, that we had total control of their movement to and from the areas that they had to go to. Although many have argued that the conditions at ADX Florence are inhumane, others believe that men like Chapo deserve this kind of treatment. At the peak of his criminal career, El Chapo ruled over the Sinaloa cartel, a Mexican drug organization responsible for moving billions of dollars in marijuana, cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine. When they were at their strongest, the organization controlled roughly 40 to 60% of Mexico's drug trade and earned around $3 billion annually. The sheer scale of their operations and the brutality with which they operated made El Chapo one of the most feared and reviled men in the world. El Chapo Guzman, once the most feared drug lord in the world, now confined within the impenetrable walls of America's most secure prison.
Jeffrey Epstein's incarceration was marked by a series of extraordinary privileges that starkly defied the norms of the justice system. While most convicted molestation offenders in Florida are sent to state prison, Epstein was afforded the luxury of being housed in a private wing of the Palm Beach County Stockade, a highly unusual arrangement that raised many eyebrows and sparked widespread criticism. Unlike other inmates, who are typically processed through a tedious and invasive intake procedure that includes strip searches, medical evaluations, and orientation, Epstein's arrival was handled with a level of discretion and care that was unprecedented. He was immediately whisked away to a private wing of the facility, far removed from the general inmate population, and treated with a level of deference that was not afforded to others. Epstein, a financier with deep ties to the world's elite, had become infamous for his heinous crimes involving the exploitation of underage girls, and his lenient treatment only added to the outrage. In June 2008, Epstein pled guilty to procuring a minor for prostitution, a plea deal that was highly controversial and criticized for being far too lenient given the severity and scope of his crimes.
In exchange for his guilty plea, Epstein received an 18-month prison sentence, a year of probation, and was required to register as a law offender, a sentence that was shockingly light considering the scale and nature of his offenses. The plea deal also included a non-prosecution agreement that granted immunity to any potential co-conspirators, effectively shielding many of Epstein's associates from facing justice and leaving many victims without closure. After serving just 3.5 months behind bars, the sheriff's office claimed that Epstein was allowed to leave the jail on work release for up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, a clear violation of the sheriff's own policies and a further example of the preferential treatment he received. Epstein's cell door was left unlocked, giving him freedom within the facility, and he had access to the attorney room where a television was installed for his comfort. Later, he was moved to the stockade's previously unstaffed infirmary, further isolating him from the general inmate population and highlighting the stark contrast between his experience and that of other inmates. These accommodations made for Epstein were far from the harsh conditions faced by most inmates and served as a stark reminder of the power of wealth and influence in the justice system. During his work release, Epstein enjoyed a unique arrangement, working at the office of a foundation he had established shortly before reporting to jail. The sheriff's office received a substantial payment of $18,000 from Epstein's nonprofit to cover the costs of extra services provided during his work release. His office was monitored by permit deputies, whose overtime was generously paid by Epstein. These deputies, dressed in suits, checked in and welcomed guests at the front desk, creating a sense of normalcy and respectability. However, the guest logs, which could have provided crucial information about Epstein's activities, were later destroyed per the department's records retention rules, although the stockade visitor logs were preserved. Epstein's privileges extended far beyond the jail walls, showcasing his immense influence. He was allowed to use his own driver to transport him between jail, his office, and other appointments, a level of freedom unheard of for a convicted molestation offender. He served almost 13 months before being released on July 22, 2009, marking the beginning of a year of probation on house arrest until August 2010. Even during his probation, Epstein enjoyed freedoms that were not typically granted to others in his position. He was allowed numerous trips on his corporate jet to his residences in Manhattan and the United Virgin Islands, as well as long shopping trips and leisurely walks around Palm Beach for exercise. The leniency of Epstein's sentencing and the extraordinary conditions of his incarceration were a stark reminder of how power and influence can corrupt the justice system, raising questions about equality and fairness. Although Epstein's initial jail sentence was filled with luxuries and special privileges, his next prison term was a stark contrast. He was held among the general population apart from the times when he was placed on suicide watch, a far cry from his previous experience in a placid setting. In a dark turn of events, he ultimately met a tragic end, found dead on August 10, 2019.